budget cuts that spell tragedy for America, and how does prayer divide Americans? Those topics and more right now today here on the Atheist Forum. You are about to enter the no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. That's right. It's the voice of atheism in Florida here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. And your opportunity to insult an atheist for only $2 is at the other end of your telephone. If you pick it up and dial 441-3000, where you can join us today here on the Atheist Forum. Ed Golly with Judy Adkins and Jim Peterson at the Tan Talk studio. Don't forget, if you call in, we'll give you your very own Get Out of Hell free card, which is transferable. Well, the mucking foron occupying the White House believes the way to produce a balanced budget is to cut services in order to keep tax rates low for the nation's multimillionaires and billionaires. The proposed billions of dollars in federal cuts to science and public education would significantly hinder America's capacity for dealing with 21st century challenges and would thwart the progress of scientific breakthroughs that improve and enrich the lives of all Americans. The White House's fiscal year 2020 budget request slashes funds for federal science-related agencies and government-funded scientific projects. Some of those include a 9% cut to the National Science Foundation, a 12% cut to the National Institutes of Health, and a 2.3% cut to NASA's overall budget, with the elimination of 2 missions that are designed for the study of climate change, and no funds whatsoever for the first telescope that would search for distant planets and dark energy.
Also, I heard the vice president announce the other day that we were going to shoot for the moon again. However,
there in 2023 or 25,
something like that. But there is no actual budgetary appropriation for that purpose in the present budget. And however, it will be necessary, if we're ever going to get to Mars, to have a stopping off point at the moon. But nevertheless, it shows us how much disarray there is in the administration itself about its allocation of resources. And the question I have is, what exactly is the source of the antagonism that the administration feels towards scientific knowledge? It seems very useful at just looking at the thing. Everything we do in ordinary life is a product. Look at our kitchens, our offices, our automobiles. Everything we do has some sort of source based in scientific knowledge. So why are they so opposed to it?
Well, because he wants to keep the tax rates low and still work toward a balanced budget, which is a commitment that he made, and make sure that the tax cuts for the super rich are retained. So the only way to get there is to start cutting the kinds of services that we really rely on, like as you just elucidated.
Well, in other words, even though it's cut back on such research now will put us at a tremendous economic disadvantage in our competition with the Chinese and the European Union and other major entities around the world, but short term, they prefer to enhance the wealth of the wealthy rather than the life of our people.
Yeah, short term and long term, because that's really what this administration is all about, is making the rich richer and the poor poorer. And of course, appealing to the religious right, which is the foundation of the voting bloc that he's trying to rely on to spend another 4 years in the White House. And he's doing that by trying to appeal to the agenda of the religious right. What I think will happen, of course, is that Planned Parenthood and the organizations that provide the kind of services that the religious right objects to will be regulated out of business. Then, by packing the courts with conservative judges, they will rule that this is not a violation of the Constitution, and women will be pushed back 100, 150 years.
Obviously, these people are bananas, but bananas are more appealing.
They are. Programs that are crucial to the environment are being slashed also. Programs at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration that are aimed at coastal research and restoration are curtailing the extinction of salmon in the Pacific Northwest. All these programs are being cut so that a few, the rich that already have more money that they know what to do with will have even more. It may also be that that's where he figures his source of funding for re-election will come from. That by giving them these generous tax cuts, they'll reward him with generous donations to his campaign.
But don't the rich deserve to be rich? I mean, they're morally superior to the rest of us, aren't they? Well, at least this is a rumor going around somewhere. I'm not sure what precincts you can find it, but wherever it is, we have to get right to it and address it.
Yes, and in the act of further dumbing down America, the Trump cuts are also siphoning up to $50 billion in federal funds from public education, transferring that money to voucher schemes for private and religious schools, as well as $30 million to the District of Columbia's voucher system. That, of course, is part of this plan to eventually eliminate the public schools or leave them as nothing more than a dumping ground for all the students that are the troublemakers and that aren't interested in learning anything, so that the whole system can be privatized without any regulation from the government, but taking the government funds and turning it all over to religion in an increasing effort to convert our country into a theocracy.
And let's not forget that Puerto Rico's just been getting too much money to deal with hurricane relief.
Yeah.
Too many paper towels. They're very absorbent.
It's unbelievable.
But when it comes to education, think about what really needs to be addressed is the reason why these students are not learning properly. What sort of conditions are they growing up in? What about these schools is it that tends to militate against their having a successful learning experience? So many of them fail to graduate and so forth. Why aren't we looking at that? Well, these are there are innumerable questions about why the situation is the way it is, and I have the suspicion that they could all be answered and they can all have solutions applied to them, which would make our society as a whole much more successful, not only in education, but in a large number of other things as well. But there are certain, as you've alluded to, Ed, there are certain interests and powers that really don't want anything like that to happen because it would threaten their position.
I think it all stems from the foundation of religious belief too, because these belief systems teach us that there are very simple answers to issues, no matter how complex they are in life. And when that can be then translated to the political arena, so that a politician like W or Trump or Sarah Palin or whatever can get up and say, well, there's very simple solutions to our problem. Build a wall. We don't need to pay for it. No more uninvited immigrants. These people are conditioned to think that if the simple solution is offered, it can just as easily be achieved, but it can't. We're seeing the same thing happening right now, today, on this day, with the healthcare issue, as the Trump administration attempts to completely eliminate the Affordable Health Care Act, but not telling us what they're going to do to replace it, right? They're just saying, we're going to give you better health care in every way. Lower premiums, lower deductibles, more choice in health insurance, and lower drug costs. But how is that going to be achieved? He never says.
Free lollipops to every patient. But who can resist?
The supporters think, well, this is a great idea. I'll vote for this guy. I want to keep him in power, except that he doesn't have any plan to actually do that, and doesn't have a way to formulate it. So all that matters to him is keeping the support of his voters so that he can stay in power, as if we can solve our problems by praying or something. But but it's he's serving the Kool-Aid to his supporters, and they're gladly drinking it without standing back and saying, tell me how you're going to improve the Affordable Health Care Act before you get rid of it. They just assume he can do it.
And the plans involve complications and, statements and policies, things you have to think about. And when you say things like that, when you outline particular kinds of plans, it opens you up to criticism, and we don't need any of that.
Well, I think
the grand plan.
Trump doesn't have the attention span or the intellectual depth to formulate these plans or understand the complexity of these issues.
As apparently neither does the cabinet.
Yeah. So, he just makes the promises of all these. He made all these promises, but the only one he's kept is the tax cut, and that's the only thing he's been able to accomplish with Congress. You could argue that, he got these 2 judges appointed, but that's his responsibility.
That was more Mitch McConnell than
exactly.
Trump.
Sure, right. Who blocked Obama's nominee. So really, what has he accomplished? Other than the tax cut, I can't think of anything significant.
He's still in office.
He keeps making the promises, that he's going to do great things for us without ever expanding on how he's going to do it. So a fellow named Jason Lemieux is the director of government affairs for an organization known as CFI, which is the Center for Inquiry. According to him, starving public education for the sake of unaccountable private and religious schools is a surefire way to make certain American students are left behind in a fast-changing world. A quality secular public education system is how we ensure a bright future for the next generation of American leaders. If the administration gets what it wants in this budget, our future will be that much darker. I think he's absolutely right. It's what we keep saying. The effort is to dumb down the American voters so they keep putting these empty promise politicians in power, which is all they want, so that they have the power to make the corporations stronger and the rich get richer at the expense of the poor, and of course to the stagnation of the middle class.
So therein we have a pretty good synopsis of our problem, in that we can't really move forward because so many people want to move backward, and the traffic is proving to be unbearable. Bridges won't hold.
Well, you're right, Jim. I mean, this whole idea of America having been greater in the 50s and the 60s and so on is just, it's a fantasy that this guy's trying to convince us that we can go back to where American workers have these good-paying, steady jobs and careers with companies. Those days are over.
I had a grandfather who built Model Ts, and he was extraordinarily successful, made a good living, could support a family of 7 or 8, whatever it was back in those days, and everything was hunky-dory. And that's what people think about. What they yearn for was those good old-fashioned values. But little do they know that the good old-fashioned times that created those values were not so good after all. And they certainly aren't sustainable in the kind of marketplace that arose subsequently. So we have to deal with a new world. Every generation has a new challenge, including our own and those that are coming up after us. And we have to enable them to have a society that has the capacity to meet those challenges. The education, the infrastructure, and in particular, what we have done to the earth itself, consequently, not just climate change, but the exhaustion of resources and depletion of topsoil, on and on. Lots of problems.
I think the other urban legend is that the economy is so exemplary, right? But then we learn that 40% of Americans can't come up with $400 for an emergency, and we're finding that in reality, the American budget is getting very strained. The economy was fine when Trump came into office. It's not like we went right from the Bush-Cheney Depression to Trump, right? We had a steady recovery in employment and in the stock market. through the 8 years of the Obama administration, to the point where unemployment was at 4.8% on inaugural day, which is anything under 5 is considered full employment. So giving it this extra shot with the tax cuts is sort of like giving a racehorse a steroid. You know, it's stronger during the race, but it's not permanent strength. So we're going to see in the next couple of years, we're going to see that the rate of growth is going to drop from 3 to 2 or 1.5%, and probably the unemployment rate will start to climb back up to around 4 to 5%. So, and it's not going to sustain through the election, because capitalism is inherently cyclical. There's nothing you can do about it.
That's very true.
And that resource is going to become real tired real soon. So we have to be prepared for that eventuality. And we rather hope that within the political structure that the senators, congresspeople, and others will recognize that and take the appropriate measures. Now, one party both parties tend to be treading the same water over and over again, it seems, but they have to deal with the problem of change, because change is going to happen whether the politicians want it or not. And we hear in the media, and I count the Atheist Forum as media, is our mission to try to educate people, to show them that things are happening that they ought to be aware of. They need to change their opinions, their ideas, and stay educated, stay tuned, as it were.
An example of how divisive religion can be is State Representative Stephanie Borowitz. She was on the 9th Jesus of her opening prayer in the Pennsylvania State House when other lawmakers started to look a little bit uncomfortable, right? The speaker is a fellow named Mike Turzai, who is also a Republican. He was clearly disturbed when he started hearing this prayer, but she carried on, delivering a 100-second ceremonial invocation that some of her colleagues decried as an offensive, divisive, and Islamophobic display shortly before the legislature swore in its first Muslim woman. So this was obviously a prayer given to show her contempt for the fact that somebody of a blatantly different religion would dare come into government. Here's an example of some of the things she said. Quote, "God forgive us, Jesus, we've lost sight of you. We've forgotten you, God, in our country, and we're asking you to forgive us." When she quoted from the Bible, from second book of Chronicles, that implores God's followers to turn from their wicked ways. Then she praised President Trump for his unequivocal support of Israel. She says, "I claim all these things in the powerful, mighty name of Jesus, the one who, at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, Jesus, that you are Lord, in Jesus' name." So she keeps shoving this down everybody's throat. That's the whole problem with the whole concept of these invocations. It's a religious exercise that should not take place in the halls of secular government. When a politician demonstrates their ignorance about the very foundation of our Constitution and our First Amendment, the issue that says that Congress will make no law respecting an establishment of religion, it demonstrates that they're unqualified to serve. They simply don't know what the heck they're doing.
Well, certainly.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Certainly they're philosophically unqualified, because they're demonstrating their inability to accept others, and to accept their ideas, their cultures, their opinions. And the whole idea of a parliament, a legislature, is that people go there
exactly.
as equals to consider these different ideas, values, and opinions. And the fact that they cannot or rely upon their affiliation with their particular interest group shows clearly that they are not suitable for a democratic government.
Well, Well, I was just going to go back to talk about Scalia and his assertion that while religious groups are protected by the Establishment Clause, non-religious groups are not protected. And we have people who are, holding him up as a great hero of the Constitution, when in fact, in my view, as an atheist, that he did not uphold the Constitution. That while they keep talking about being originalist, but they don't really want to go back and study what those people believed and how they would be now. It's not written in stone. It's not meant to be.
Sure.
You're
And
right.
so we have politicians who think it's their call to duty to come in and convert this country into a theocracy. We see that in our own state with the legislature, chipping away at the public school budgets and expanding the voucher program so that the religions and churches will be responsible for virtually all of the education in the state. We see that with the issues about abortion and adoption.
Yes.
Where and Daniels, the legislator from
Kim Daniels,
from Jacksonville, the Jacksonville area, Duval County, who wants to see Florida be a theocracy and impose Christian religion on all the students all the time. She wants to put Bible study courses in our public school. Makes it very clear that this will just be the Christian Bible. This will just be the study of the Bible of Jesus and so on. They're not going to study multiple religions.
Right.
No, it's going to be Christianity, because to her, that's the only true religion. And her position as a legislator is to impose it on all of us through the government.
And let's just clarify that schools can already offer Bible study as an elective if they choose to. Her bill would make it a requirement to offer that as an elective. So it's already there.
And once that hurdle is crossed, then what's the next one? To make it mandatory.
Yes.
You must study this in order to graduate, right? And it will only be the preferred religion.
So there are a number of different projects put out by the dominant religious community, one of which is called Project Blitz. And do you know anything about that?
We've discussed it on the program at length in past programs.
And we will have a person next week who will discuss it at length.
Oh, good.
So
they go all the better reason to tune in then.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
But Blitz is exactly that. It's the gradual but consistent weaning away of the First Amendment, weaning us off the First Amendment to impose religion on all of us, and then by packing the courts with conservative judges, which is what we have in Florida and what we're getting on the federal benches and the Supreme Court. These judges will then turn around and declare and state and rule that our interpretation of this issue is that it's not a violation of the Constitution to impose religion on people.
But they're relying on the free exercise clause, that you cannot impede somebody.
Turning it inside out.
Yes. And I don't think, and I'm obviously not an expert in free exercise. I think Jim knows quite a bit about that.
No.
But, I don't think it was ever meant to be, I can do whatever I want as long as it's based in the Christian Bible. And I can discriminate against anyone.
And certainly we have had the historical experience and the present experience of so many places in the world in which the hegemony of a particular religion has been imposed on society to the detriment of that society. There are places in the world where if you express doubts or criticism of a religion or religious personalities or anything of the kind, it's considered to be a criminal matter, which in some cases you can be executed for it.
Yes.
Well, the irony of this issue, this prayer in Pennsylvania State House, is that this chamber's top Democrat, a representative named Frank Dermody, speaking from the House floor, said, "Never have we started out with a prayer that divides us. Prayer should never divide us. It should bring us together." Well, if to those of us who reject religion, prayer, just by virtue of its existence in a public forum, is divisive. It assumes that we all subscribe to some God or another. A lot of people who are religious insist that atheism is just another religion, that it's impossible to live without some kind of a belief system.
Right.
No, it absolutely is not. And if you disagree with us, call us up and tell us why you disagree.
Please.
Here on the Tan Talk Radio Network, 441-3000. So on this very nice Friday afternoon, you're listening to the most interesting program on the Tan Talk Network,
He said
the
modestly.
Atheist Forum. We're going to take just a quick break to tell you about an atheist organization here in the Tampa Bay area, and then we'll continue here on 1340 WTAN. Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. 2:33 on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Jim, you have something you want to tell our listeners about?
Well, yes. Upcoming on June 20th will be the National Conference of the American Ethical Union. It's going to take place in Tampa, and you can get details by going to aeu.org and learn all about it. To be honored is one of our own Tampa area pioneers in free thought, and that's Edward L. Erickson. So he's quite a personality. So anyway, that's just something to put on your calendar.
And we'll remind you of it more as the event approaches.
We'll bring you up to date.
Well, good news, bad news, usually more bad than good from our point of view.
That's good.
A federal appeals court ruled a week ago that a law giving clergy tax-free housing allowances is constitutional, which overturned a ruling in Wisconsin that said it was an unconstitutional benefit and delivered a huge win to religious leaders who had fought to keep the substantial benefit, which means that those of us who pay taxes are continuing to support religion and the clergy against our will, which is, of course, one of the fundamental violations of the Constitution as we see it.
I'm sure Joel Osteen appreciates that with his multi-million-dollar mansion. It's being quite a benefit to.
And his big cars and planes.
Yes,
and
all
the
those
goodies.
things.
He among others, it should be said.
Yes, he among others.
Many others.
Well, several religious organizations intervened in the case, and their position is that the survival of many congregations depends on keeping the housing allowance. A group of more than 5,000 pastors signed on to an alliance defending freedom letter supporting the exemption. So they're freely admitting that they rely on the taxpayers to subsidize their religions. But
well, they do anyway because they don't have to pay taxes on
Sure.
church buildings and on other property they own, regardless of whether it's a profit-making.
and
opportunity
they're
or
not
not.
required to offer accountability
No,
for how
they are
they
not.
spent their funds. So that leads to a lot of corruption that
Yes.
must go uncovered. And of course, they want to keep it that way. But it just shows the courts are continuing to support public support of religion. Now, of course, what's going to happen as more Muslims come into our country and people of what you would call non-mainstream religions come in and start demanding vouchers for their schools and public support for their buildings and institutions, public funds to build rebuild, I should say, their buildings if damaged by meteorological events. You're going to start seeing a lot of issues that are going to start being challenged by even religionists as they stand back and realize that they don't want to support religions that they don't like.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that despite the fact that substantial resources in this country are devoted to the support of religious institutions, those institutions have their pews filled by fewer and fewer people. According to all the latest census statistics, the number of people who attend church regularly is continuing to decline, a long-term trend of about 50 or more years. And so it's kind of an, forgive the word, empty gesture.
Following in the footsteps of Western Europe, right?
Yes.
Which is what, 50 to 100 years ahead of that
Yes.
trend that's happening now in the States.
And all those spaces could be, as Western Europe has done, converted into something useful: public meeting spaces, libraries, clinics, and so forth.
Working class housing.
That's right.
Yes.
I mean, there's enormous need for shelter, for roofs over heads and roofs over public goods of various kinds. So we need to continuously re-examine these issues and try to work within the existing arrangement to try and move the situation forward. That is, if churches, we should impose taxes on churches, absolutely. But we can make arrangements so that if they want to not pay so much taxes, they can contribute by making their facilities available for some public good.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Use those buildings.
Let's see. I was going to mention that. Okay, the 7th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals said in its ruling, this is about a week ago, that the effect of the 1954 law is, quote, neither to endorse nor to inhibit religion, and it does not cause excessive government entanglement, unquote. The court noted that Congress has been providing federal tax exemptions for religious organizations as far back as 1802. So their position is, what, two wrongs make a right? We've been doing it wrong all along, so we'll continue to do it wrong. We're in the 21st century now, and it's time for us to realize that the world's a little different than it was at the beginning of the 19th century, and understand the consequences of compelling those of us who have no interest in religion from being required to help support it.
Yes, that seems rather overtly to be unfair, wouldn't you think?
Yes.
And for the first time, nuns, N-O-N-E-S, are the largest religious group in the U.S., just edging out Catholics and fundamentalist Christians. And like you all said, that's going to continue to grow. But we got to get our act together and make demands that some political fronts to be able to get some of this stopped. I would like to go back to one one thing on the budget cuts, and that is that he's proposing a reduction in cancer research of 14%. He's increasing the amount for pediatric cancer care, but overall the reduction to the Cancer Institute is 14%. And as our population ages, cancer is more common. So by reducing this, a lot more people are going to suffer from cancer, and suffer it is too.
I think it's also because of the toxic environment we create, burning fossil fuels, coal, and all
sure that adds
stuff.
to it.
Sure.
And he's proposing cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, even though he promised during his campaign he would never touch those, and Social Security.
But cancer is not very popular. People don't.
No,
like
it is not.
And since they don't like it, if you underfund it, well, perhaps it'll go away. There you go. Solve the problem.
Just don't talk about it, and it won't exist anymore, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, here's some good news. A federal judge in Raleigh, North Carolina, has declared unconstitutional a North Carolina law banning women from having abortions after the 20th week of pregnancy, except in an urgent medical emergency. So, we see that fight continuing.
And we have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that ties into the attempted demise of Planned Parenthood too. That these states that are so opposed to this, to abortion, will try to regulate these institutions
Yes.
out of business, and the courts will support it, claiming that
Yeah.
it isn't a constitutional violation. And all was, the way government turns things around, right? The Clean Air Act means they're going to put more poison, but not a lot more in the air.
Right.
The Healthy Forest Act means they're going to cut down most of it, but not all of it.
Yes.
So what's left will be healthy. But it's the same thing here, that this will be disguised as seeking to help perpetuate the health of women and the
Right.
safety and the protection of them. And that's why these things will be needed, when in fact it'll be eliminating these critical services that so many women need, and especially in the flyover states where they really can't afford it unless they go to these kinds of clinics.
And it's not going to be just the flyover states, because Florida currently has 2 bills proposed that would radically restrict abortion. One is a fetal heartbeat, which can be heard at 6 weeks. Most women don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. So no abortion after 6 weeks is currently on the docket for the Florida legislature. And the other is the supposed scientific thing of fetuses can feel pain at about 20 weeks, and then would outlaw abortion after that, at that point. And they want, it's kind of funny because they talk about doing science and all this stuff, but you read their bills and they no longer call it a fetus. They call it the unborn living being. They go out of their way to make it an emotional appeal to people, rather than dealing with the scientific method or the scientific language of what it is. It's a fetus. It's not an unborn living
Next thing
being.
you know, they'll be changing the birthday to the date of conception.
Yes, exactly.
You're born.
Exactly.
Right.
And if their intention is to protect the lives of, what did you say, unborn living beings?
Yeah.
Well, then rats and roaches could apply.
That's true, isn't it?
For protection as well.
So it's pretty bad. And the other thing that I would like to mention briefly before we go on to another topic, although it's not related to exactly what we're talking about, is the move to allow a rampant banning of books from our school system, our public school system. Any parent or resident of a county can object to a book, and they have to have a hearing, and they have to go through all these things to determine. And they're accusing books that have been winners of children's literature awards of being pornographic, and thus should be removed from the schools.
That's a main indicator, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, some of the books, A Clockwork Orange, obviously it's not a children's book, but a high school student's book, is being banned for being pornographic. And yes, it is pretty explicit, but it's also an artistic feat of literature. And thinking about how society works. It's not, the violence is there, but it's not gratuitous. It's related to
It's
how
intrinsic to the artistic.
yes, how
tension.
society works.
Well, therefore, then it's time for us to step up to the plate and complain about the Bible.
Yes.
Because it's filled with all
Well,
sorts
well,
of...
that's my question. If some of the stuff that's in the Bible were in any other book, it would be banned for being pornographic.
Exactly.
Well, it doesn't do so much to actually describe it. I mean, the Bible does not go into fine details about
No.
But, it's smiting every man, woman, and child in the village and take it over. And
Well, Lot
so on,
giving his daughters to
Hittites
the people who came to
yeah.
rape the angels.
that's right.
Take my daughters instead, they're virgins. So
Take
it's
my
much
daughter,
better
please.
for you to rape them than it is to accost these angels who are visiting my house.
The craziest part of the whole thing is one strategy I think that the religious right will attempt to use to impose the Bible on the public school students of this state or the whole country will be to declare that the Bible is the foundation of our
Mhm.
Constitution, of our civil liberties and our freedom. Well, of course, it's not.
No,
It's the
it
exact
isn't.
opposite. Otherwise, all of Western Europe would have had the same kind of civil liberties and civil rights that we eventually got because of our Constitution. And we didn't have them on day one, right? Women
Right.
couldn't
No.
vote, people could be enslaved, Native peoples could be massacred, and so on. But over time, because of what was written, regardless of what the intent was, it was applied in the courts to provide these protections. Of course, the Bible had nothing to do with that, but they realized most people can't make that distinction because they don't ever read the Bible. They only believe
Or anything
that
else.
whatever somebody tells them is in it is what's there, exactly, or anything else. They don't read anything else.
Yeah, if they did, they
so
would
by
read.
selling this concept that the Bible is the foundation, well, then it's mandatory that students learn about it and learn about Jesus and all that stuff, because that's why we are a country of civil liberties and freedom.
However, I will say that reading the Bible made me an atheist. So
As it does for many people,
as it does
actually.
for many people, because when you
Not
read it,
everybody.
it's full of stuff,
Sure.
Horrors.
junk, horrors, and
Well, it's true. That's like the story of the student, the religionist who decides to study theology or whatever, and to discredit evolution, and only to find out that, wow, this actually makes sense,
yes,
and they become an atheist. I've heard of that more than once.
yes,
But most people, of course, don't have the attention span or the time to sit down and
Right.
go through an extremely boring, long, pointless book called the Bible.
But if they did have the time and the interest and the attention span, they would discover that the values of our society, even now, and certainly the values of the founders, had more to do with the European Enlightenment. That period of time when philosophers and thinkers and writers rose up and began to challenge the information they had received from the church and compared it to the books from the ancient philosophers of Rome and Greece, and began to accumulate for themselves the scientific knowledge that enabled them to declare a high degree of independence for the time. So I think it's worthwhile for students to really study the origins of our country
yes.
and come to realize that things are very different from what many preachers might have to say about it. Not all, to be sure, but some of the less informed.
There were some very enlightened ministers in Tallahassee
Mhm.
this last week who were advocating for the abolishment of vouchers and the support of public schools.
Wow.
So
And did they explain why?
they did go into some explanation.
But you can't give us a thumbnail.
Well, it was basically that public education is important to our democracy, and they don't want people being indoctrinated into a false knowledge of how the world works.
But why do we need to know about democracy if we're going to have Trump become dictator for life? I mean, that just pretty much takes care of that issue.
He can decide
He's
everything.
not going to
Worse.
become dictator.
Did you ever wonder what an atheist invocation might sound like? Well, actually, we've been invited on many occasions to offer invocations at city council meetings around the area, the Tampa Bay area. And only a few weeks ago, we gave one at the Clearwater City Council meeting. Jim Peterson, sitting next to me, gave the invocation. And if you'd like to know what he said, maybe we can entice him to read it for you.
Well, of course, I'm always glad to read, and I know you want to hear me too, don't you? Well, anyway, here's what was said. Ladies and gentlemen of the council, I'm privileged to come before this body to summon some thoughts about the foundational nature of our common enterprise. Yours as public servants in our city of over 115,000 residents, and mine as a citizen with all the obligations that maintaining our democracy demands. While an invocation is conventionally thought of as a conveyance for some denominational religious thought, it seems appropriate to invoke the wisdom of those who came before us, the intelligence of their thinking, and their participation in the ever ongoing struggle of human history have endowed our time with the gift of freedom, a flower that does not cease to grow, but which requires careful nurture to exist. The everyday demands of the life of our city can sometimes obscure the roots of our commitment to freedom, but it is often useful to reconnect with that past and touch once again the driving force of human history that is manifest over the 230 years of the American story. Our experience is not limited to the vast changes in our own narrative, but now lights the path of all humanity, and for better or worse, leads the development of our species. Whether the condition of the natural world or the direction of our political and social
sermon,
rights.
not an invocation.
Absolutely. You told me to do it, Ed, so I'm doing it. Anyway.
Dozed off through this. Anyway,
Hey,
all right, fine. You get the last minute. I just wrapped this
Who
thing
could? Yeah, all right. Anyway, we just called upon people to look at what Thomas Jefferson said, how he put it so eloquently, that we have placed our trust in you, our counselors, at the cutting edge of securing freedom and the flowering of liberty at the most intimate level of everyday life. And so that was our message to the counselors. And because they are the local government, they are our representative, the most immediate government people that stand between us and tyranny. So there.
But the very definition of an invocation, isn't it to invoke, to somehow invoke a deity and offer some kind of thanks to the deity for the conditions that we live in, and yet, in a secular society, how can we do that? In a secular government, how can we be invoking thanks to a deity when in fact it is we, the people, and we, our government, that runs things and is responsible for the way things operate?
But we can invoke our history, we can invoke our philosophy, our outlook, our wisdom and intelligence. There's lots of things we can invoke that do not require us to necessarily bow to any sort of religious figure.
But that's why I would oppose. If I thought that they would get rid of religious invocations, we would stop doing invocations. Sure. But they're not going to get rid of the religious ones. So we have to make it known that there are people out there who have different views, and they need to serve everyone.
But don't you think the whole point of the invocation is always to, keep the nose of the camel under the edge of the tent, to always imply that, oh yes, everything is so great here because we trust in this God, and this God looks down on us with special favor.
It's our state motto.
And we've corrupted our national motto into essentially the same motto.
It turns out that camel has a cold.
Yeah. But, how do we trust in a God? We've asked that question before, and we can't find an answer. I don't trust in gods for anything. We do. Why do we have hospitals? Why do we have military?
Exactly.
Why do we have building codes? It's because we know we can't trust in a God. We've got to trust in government and common sense.
I was reading a story just recently about this man who was a doctor who had been, he says, an atheist, although I don't think that was really the case, who got sick and wasn't supposed to live. And then God told him to go and have this treatment anyway. And he did. And lo and behold, God cured him.
Yeah, right. Sure.
Amazing.
So I don't know why God couldn't have cured him without the treatment.
Mm-hmm.
But he did what God said, and he was cured, and now he's a gung-ho Christian.
Yes. Yep, that'll do it.
Because, we never can find out how many people started praying when the tornado was coming over the horizon, right? And they died. The only ones we hear from are the ones that survived and accredit it to a God. I think, why didn't they just pray that the tornado vanished and never hit their house in the first place, right? Everything would be normal. How many prayers were said before Hurricane Michael hit Mexico Beach, right?
And it is highly likely that the 1,700 people who didn't survive the Titanic prayed up a storm.
Near my God,
seem to make a
isn't that what they were
Sure.
playing at the end? All the musicians.
As well as,
Exactly.
all the people of the First and Second World Wars and all the world wars and all the famines and all the trials and tribulations to which humans are heir, the majority of people had religious beliefs, and they prayed, they made sacrifices. The Inca and the Mayans, Aztecs, they all made human sacrifices. It didn't help a bit.
No, it didn't.
It doesn't. So we, as we always say at Atheists, the helping hand is on the end of your arms, right?
Yes. Thanks, Amy. Very good point of view.
Judy, I think we have some guests we're lining up for some of the future programs. Do you want to mention who they might be and what they're going to talk about, or you think we should wait till we actually get them booked in the studio?
I can tell you that next week we have tentatively scheduled, I'm waiting to hear back from her, a woman who lives in Lakeland who is going to talk about Project Blitz.
Good.
So we will have that, and I'm working on some other people as guests, but I don't have anybody confirmed yet, so I'd rather not bring it up.
But we'll be back week after week here on the Tan Talk Radio Network with the Atheist Forum. Any closing comments, Jimmy?
Well, we have one other guest scheduled for the 12th, and that will be Jackie Aziz from the ACLU.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Looking forward to hearing her talk. And I do have a quote. May I read the quote? It's a short one.
By all means.
And it's by Aristotle, and it says, "The mark of an educated mind is the ability to entertain a thought without accepting it."
All right, you want to expand on that, or just
well, Aristotle didn't. I think
okay.
it's pretty obvious. In other words, you can consider what people have to say without necessarily agreeing with it. And that seems to be a real problem for people today.
It's getting to be an extreme problem in our society. It's
we do have one other confirmed guest, and that's in early May. We're going to have Joseph Richardson back because the lawsuit they brought against Brevard County is going to court.
Okay. And of course, Jackie is from the ACLU. You'll be talking about some of the legislation that's going on in Tallahassee. And how threatening that is to our civil liberties, not just those of us who are atheists, but those of us who are tax-paying citizens in this state. Go ahead, Jim.
Also, the person who's coming next week from Lakeland, maybe can discuss the artist there who was forced to remove a work that he had on display that offended religious sensibilities.
That's all the time we got for today. Hope you'll join us again next week here on the Atheist Forum on the Tan Talk Radio Network, along with Judy Adkins and Jim Peterson. I'm Ed Golly, reminding you, if the story seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it. Just because somebody wrote it down,
make them prove it.
You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. And join us again next Friday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
WZHR, Zephyr Hills.
FM 104.3.
Listen.
A Mexican response. Britain's ugly divorce. I'm Mike Moss. President Trump says Mexico isn't doing enough to stop the flow of illegal migrants through the southern border, and he's threatening to shut the border down as early as next week.
They have the strongest immigration laws anywhere in the world, and we have the weakest, the most pathetic laws. Number one, Congress has to act.
Mexico's foreign minister says his country is a good neighbor and doesn't act on the basis of threats. More from White House correspondent Bob Costantini.
Not only is President Trump frustrated with migrants coming through Mexico toward the U.S., as he tweets, if Mexico doesn't immediately stop all illegal immigration coming into the United States through our southern border, I will be closing the border or large sections of the border next week. He's also frustrated with the not quite finalized new U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Mexico and Canada want tariffs imposed on their steel and aluminum exports to the U.S. lifted before ratifying a treaty that Congress also needs to approve. Bob Costantini, Washington.
The British Parliament has for a third time rejected a Brexit plan from Prime Minister Theresa May. And correspondent Nick Robertson in London says time is running out.
Britain now has 2 weeks left to tell the European Union, is it going to leave without a deal, the no deal, the essentially crash out of the European Union, very messy, huge economic consequences for the UK and the European Union, or will Parliament try to block that?
Business leaders say Brexit without a replacement plan could result in economic catastrophe for Europe